on monks. The title of this book, War, Persecution, and the Salvation of Tibet's Oldest Religion. It'll be presented by the authors and partners, Harvey Rice and Jackie Cole. Harvey is a journalist known to many of us through his work at the Houston Chronicle. And Jackie is a retired veterinarian, also known to many of us through our pets. Welcome to you both.
Here, is this yours?
Yes,
Okay. Show it off, huh? I lost my other half. Okay. Good morning. Or as the Tibetans would say, Tashi Delay. Tashi Delay. It means greetings. Literally, it means good fortune to you, but it's used as a greeting. Since we were here at UU last number of years ago talking about our book, we've had a number of wonderful things that have occurred. We got a publisher. The publisher changed the name of the book from Ambush at Murari to The Flight of the Bun Monks, which we love. And they designed the cover, which we love. And the book was published in February of last year, so it's been out just a year. We were thrilled that they also put out an audio version. So if you like to listen to books, it's on audio. It's read by Jazz Sands, who I'd never heard of before, but he has a slight British accent, which is really nice, seeing that the book travels to London. The characters go to London at some point. And we really like the way he's read the book. So if you like to listen to books, this is a good one. We got a very good review from Kirkus Reviews, which does the books. And we won an International Book Award for Creative Nonfiction. We've done, because in the book world, most of the times it's difficult to sell a book to a publisher unless you have what's called a platform. And that's a lot of online followers or a school that you're teaching classes, or somehow you already have your readers. So we don't have a platform. Our agent suggested that our best way to sell books, because we have no platform, was through podcasts. So we've been lucky enough to do about 18 podcasts already, and we're invited and appeared on Gaia TV, the Open Minds program with Regina Meredith. So we've had a lot of fun doing those kinds of things. We've published short excerpts in several Buddhist magazines. So we're trying to get the word out around the country that this is, and the world actually, about the book. All this comes about from being able to tell this a truly amazing and remarkable story of courage and devotion. We tell the stories of three main characters from childhood until now, trying to weave in the amazing geography, lifestyles, mores, and culture of a very isolated country. Isolated due to the choices it made and also its geography. Most of you, I'm sure, know where Tibet is. It sits northeast of India, directly north of Nepal, with the Himalayas being the border, and south of China, west of China. There's a whole host of supporting characters in the book, in addition to the three that are very interesting in and of themselves, and also help to explain the story and the history as it moves along. Two of our characters, Semten Karme and Sanjay Tenzin, came from neighboring villages in Amdo in eastern Tibet and went there on the border of China and went to school together. They became and remained lifelong friends despite different paths that they took after they were able to escape. The whole escape was necessitated by the invasion of Tibet by China and then the overthrow of the government there. Our main character, Yongdzin Tenzin Namdok Rinpoche, in the book Tenzin Namdok, is the third character. He was born in 26 in Kham, the southern part, there on the eastern part. And we have 1926, and yet I think it's the way they count their birthdays. He celebrated his 100th birthday in February. There was they built a new temple, and they finally got it finished in time for his celebration, and thousands of people came from all over the world to help him celebrate his birthday. We traveled in December, over Christmas, December, January, to India and Nepal to pay our respects to those people in our book and who helped us with this book. And I have a little bit more about that later. Our characters, destined to be monks in their youth, changed their lives. The invasion by the Chinese and crackdown on religion changed their lives completely. Tenzin Namdok, our main character, was shot and left for dead during his escape attempt, only to be saved by friends and strangers along the way. Samten Karme and Sanjay Tenzin were able to walk out of Nepal. They'd been in Lhasa at the time of the bombing of Lhasa, and they were able to escape from there and walk out, only to be hit by dysentery due to the climate and crowded conditions in refugee camps. But fortuitously, in various assorted ways, the three ran into a British scholar who invited them to London. Joining the three most learned Bund scholars in the community in exile together. They'd met briefly once before, but now they traveled together to London and to study and learn together. And that changed their lives. Every time as we worked on this book, whenever we would interview someone, we would ask them, who else do we need to talk to? Or something would come up. And every time we turned around, there was another fascinating little tidbit to add to the drama. There was the description of the travel around Mount Kailash, murderous monks who took over a monastery where the teenage Tenzin Namdok was painting, the isolation of the Tibetans of the rest of the world by choice, leaving them vulnerable to the Chinese, the CIA, the United States' CIA connections to the Khampa rebels, training hand-picked Tibetans in Colorado and dropping them back in Tibet and doing arms drops to try to support them. A disastrous program for the Tibetans. The fight for Lhasa during the uprising. There's a chapter in the book describing the shelling and destruction of the monasteries. The Mother Manri Monastery, which is now in exile in India, but the original in Tibet, and the escape of the monks from there, and the interconnection of that with all of the others. The remarkable survival of Tenzin Namdok after he was shot, and his stay in a concentration camp and hike over the Himalayas. I mean, this is a story you couldn't make up, and yet it's true. Every bit of it is true. It's an escape book. It's a history book. It's a survival book. It's very exciting, but it's also a book about devotion and determination and love. When we were lucky enough to travel Tibet in 2014, 10 years ago, we witnessed the continued suppression of the Tibetans by the Chinese. It continues on to this day. Harvey?
Good morning. So, although I had long contemplated writing a book, never in my wildest fantasies had I conceived that the book would be about a few Tibetan monks from an obscure religion. And had it not been for Jackie, I never would have. Jackie appeared in my home office one afternoon more than 10 years ago with a book proposition. She regaled me with a fascinating story about one of her teachers who had been ambushed and left for dead while trying to escape Chinese communist religious oppression. I immediately agreed it was a great story. Thus began a long journey that ended in the publication of our book. We had no idea how compelling the story was when we began. Gradually, we realized we were writing about the salvation of a religion which otherwise would have fallen into irrelevance and control by the Chinese Communist Party. I already knew something about Bun through Jackie, who was a practitioner when I married her. But as we interviewed Bun monks, my respect for this little-known religion grew. I could only admire the faith, strength, and determination of our characters, as well as the humanity and worldview of Bun that sustained them through adversity and trials that would daunt the stoutest heart. As a secular Buddhist, I already adhered to some Bun teachings, but researching the book turned out to be an education in a religious philosophy that enables individuals to deal with an often chaotic and cruel world. For instance, a key Bun precept is that the only unchanging aspect of our world is the certainty of change. I embrace the idea, and it has helped me deal with the inevitable and often unexpected change of everyday life. Unfortunately, the everyday life of Tibetans has worsened since we visited Tibet in 2014. According to Human Rights Watch, the U.S. State Department, and the U.S. Congressional Commission on China. From freedom of expression to religious freedoms, the Chinese government has kept a chokehold over the country throughout 2024, said Maya Wang, Associate China Director at Human Rights Watch. The Chinese government has further tightened abusive laws and imprisoned critics and rights defenders while making it increasingly difficult to report on government abuses throughout the country. For example, the Chinese government is building several dams while ignoring the plight of Tibetans who will be forced to move from scores of villages and monasteries that will be flooded. In February and March last year, hundreds of monks and villagers in Derge County, Sichuan, were detained for protesting the construction of a hydroelectric dam. Among the threatened monasteries is Wantou Monastery, known for its well-preserved 13th century murals. The State Department reports that Tibetans are disappeared by the government. For example, Tibetan monk and writer Rongwo Gangkar disappeared in 2021 after his arrest for speaking about the Dalai Lama in an informal gathering. Likewise, Karma Samduk disappeared in 2022 after his arrest for inciting separatism while possessing photos of the Dalai Lama. Both are still missing. The Tibetan Center for Human Rights and Democracy maintained a database of more than 2,000 Tibetans imprisoned in violation of international human rights standards. Many are subjected to torture and other forms of abuse. Even Tibetans living outside their country are subjected to harassment, monitoring, and cyber attacks by the Chinese government. In a March statement, Tenzin Dorje of the Tibet Action Committee said government authorities continued to threaten families of Tibetans living outside the country to dissuade them from criticizing Chinese policies. In one incident, a Tibetan living in Scotland received a video call from his family in Tibet. To his horror, he realized his family was in a police station. An officer appeared and warned him that his family would suffer if he publicly criticized Chinese policies. Authorities electronically and manually monitored private correspondence and searched without warrant private homes and businesses for photographs of the Dalai Lama and other forbidden items. Police routinely examined the cell phones of residents in random stops or as part of other investigations to search for reactionary music from India or photographs of the Dalai Lama. Authorities also questioned and detained Tibetans who disseminated writings and photographs via the internet or listened to teachings of the Dalai Lama on their cell phones. Chinese officials are also trying to eradicate the use of the Tibetan language. In January, a Tibetan university student in Sichuan province was fined 50,000 yuan, about $6,800, in order to attend weekly political education sessions for organizing a Tibetan New Year celebration by using only Tibetan language decorations and performances. Chinese authorities demanded that only Mandarin be used, although most attendees could not understand the language, and that songs in praise of the Chinese Communist Party be sung. Monasteries throughout Tibetan areas of China were required to integrate Chinese Communist Party members into their governance structures, where they exercise control over monastic admission, education, security, and finances. In August, the Tibetan Center for Human Rights and Democracy reported masked men beat Tibetan language advocate Tashi Wangchuk in his hotel room after he filmed a video near a middle school about the disappearance of the Tibetan language in schools. The attackers forced him to erase all photographs and videos he had taken that day. In February, UN experts warned that about 1 million Tibetan children are being forced to assimilate culturally, religiously, and linguistically throughout the school system. Students are forced to live in boarding schools where they are taught Mandarin Chinese and denied access to traditional or culturally relevant learning. As a result, Tibetan children were losing their ability to communicate with parents and grandparents in the Tibetan language, contributing to the erosion of their identity. So at this point, I thought I would read the prologue, and that will give you a sense of what the book is about. A prologue, a deadly encounter at 15,000 feet. Let me put my reading glasses on here. Fear hastened Tenzin Nandak to the top of a rocky ridge, one of the many that crisscross Tibet's highest plateau. A frigid wind whipped his face as he scanned the treeless, rocky landscape, searching for a glimpse of the Chinese troops who hunted him and his companions. He knew the soldiers would shoot them on sight. The year was 1960. The Chinese had invaded Tibet a decade earlier and cajoled it into surrender with promises of respect for its religion and culture. Forsaken by the rest of the world, its military severely outmatched, Tibet had grudgingly agreed to allow China to station troops in its capital, Lhasa. But Chinese communism was incompatible with the deeply religious Tibetan culture. Popular resentment swelled, finally exploding in a violent uprising. In retaliation, the Chinese began a vicious campaign of religious persecution. Tenzin, 34, one of the most revered lamas of the Bun religion, Tibet's oldest and least known faith, was among thousands of Tibetans fleeing the country to avoid Chinese re-education sessions, where they were forced to accuse, beat, and even execute neighbors and family members in a campaign targeting religion and class. Chinese troops were dispatched to seal the borders and hunt Tibetans fleeing Nepal, India, to Nepal, India, and Bhutan. Tenzin hoped to outpace his pursuers as he headed west across Tibet's bleakest and least populated terrain. Strung out along the trail with Tenzin were 30 companions, among them the most learned Bun lamas. Others were monks who had renounced their vows of nonviolence in order to protect the lamas. The lamas and their escorts had traveled hundreds of miles from several different monasteries to Tenzin's small, remote monastery on the Chongtong Plateau, a vast and desolate landscape of high plains and mountains, thinly populated by nomadic herders. In this time of crisis, they looked to Tenzin for direction because of his eminent reputation. They would have lost that leadership had he taken an offer of safe passage from a wealthy merchant making his way to the border, who told stories of Chinese cruelty and brought news that the Dalai Lama had fled the country. The merchant had urged Tenzin to leave with him, but Tenzin would not forsake his fellow monks. Disregarding his own safety, he had resolved to await word from the lamas who, unbeknownst to him, were dodging Chinese patrols as they made their way to him. Tenzin and the lamas had set out 3 days earlier, joined by dozens of lay Tibetans and a group of armed rebels. Tenzin divided them into 3 groups. Each group would travel within sight of the others, allowing the others to flee if one group was attacked. Heading west, they changed direction whenever they spotted the black, yak-hair tents of nomads or their flocks of sheep. They knew that fear or Chinese silver could induce the nomads to betray their fellow Tibetans. The monks carried a few sacred texts and artifacts they had been able to rescue from their monasteries before they were looted by Chinese troops. Tenzin carried the most sacred object, a 600-year-old reliquary containing the ashes of the founder of Bun's premier monastery. The artifacts were mere slivers of a culture under assault by the Chinese. Soldiers were torturing and killing monks, razing temples, and destroying text, statues, and paintings. Tenzin's world was being ripped apart. Escape was the only way to ensure the monks' survival and the survival of Bun itself. Their only escape route was across the daunting Himalayas that lay south of the vast plateau. In Sanskrit, Himalaya means the abode of snow. The Himalayas would be the final abode for untold numbers of Tibetans as they died from hunger, cold, avalanches, and steep plunges from rocky heights during their long trek to freedom. Moving as fast as possible, members of Tenzin's party continually cast wary eyes behind them. As the cold blue sky faded toward darkness, the monks made camp in the shadow of a mountain at the edge of a lake, tethering their pack animals and pitching their tents. While the animals were being unloaded, A black donkey reared and snorted, refusing to be handled. Tenzin saw it as a dark portent. As the monks crouched around the campfire, heating water for black tea, the crack of a single bullet rent the air. The men bolted upright in alarm. The shot grew to a fusillade as the Tibetans scattered. Streams of green tracer bullets licked at scurrying figures, pitching them onto the earth. Tenzin ran for his life.
He's a good writer, huh? We traveled to India and Nepal in December, January to pay our respects to those people in our book and who helped us. We started in Dharamsala, India, where we had an appointment to receive a blessing from His Holiness the Dalai Lama. So we took him our book and presented it to him. He wrote the foreword to our book. So it was very interesting. They knew who we were. We didn't get any special attention, but they did know who we were, which was pretty cool. It was very sweet and dear to be able to spend even a few seconds with the Dalai Lama. We went on then to Menri Monastery and met a number of our friends there who had helped us with the book, and spent time with, there's a nunnery there now where they're graduating geshes, women geshes, nun geshes, which is the highest degree in the tradition. It's like a PhD. And so they're now graduating women geshes. They call them geshe ma. So we were able to spend some time with them, which was delightful as well. From there we went to Kathmandu, where Tenzin Namdok lives, and was able to visit with him. There's an old Zen phrase: before enlightenment, chop wood and carry water. And after enlightenment, chop wood and carry water. And I find this to be the case with all of these highest lamas and nuns that we visited and that I've come across with in my journey in this path, including Tenzin Namdok. They embody this spirit. They're going about their lives, teaching, cleaning, ordering goods, whatever it is that they need to do, and yet they managing daily problems, they still have this calmness and joy that radiates. It just permeates the space, and it makes you feel calmer just to be around them. It's and it's been our experience that each of these people that we meet that are highly trained and more realized have this aura, have this ability to be at peace regardless of whatever is. I shouldn't say peace, because they are humans. We all are humans. But to have a more sense of perspective that allows us to be calm and to just solve problems, not to make our problems our problem. So the teachings of the religion says that this comes from training our mind. The calming of the mind and the realization of the basic tenets, impermanence and the inseparability of all things, and the true nature of the mind. It's a tradition in many cultures for masters to leave final departing words of wisdom. We see this if you read haikus. You can see that all of the haiku masters have left deathbed haikus. In our tradition, there are, these are known as pith instructions or instructions from the heart. They're usually not written on the deathbed. They're usually written as the people get older and have wisdom that they want to pass on to their students or adherents. There is a famous one, which Dawa Jiaozhen from the 8th century. This one is very famous. Whole books have been written about this particular one and how to interpret it and how to apply it to your life. Vision is mind. Mind is empty. Empty is clear light. Clear light is union. Union is bliss. It's really just the path to enlightenment or your realization of the natural mind. But as you can see, it's pretty esoteric. No wonder books are written about trying to understand it. And less esoteric, but nonetheless impactful, are the pith instructions, the heart instructions from Tenzin Namdok, which I would like to read to you now and close with. Your own mind is the root of both happiness and suffering. Knowing how to train it in the positive way, that is the basis for happiness. Merely following the passions of your mind, that is the basis for the ocean of miseries and sufferings. Thus, if you know how to choose the right way, you are an excellent person. Okay, so we'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have. We actually have a couple of pictures. These are what I consider icing on the cake. They're from our trip. Well, there's some history and then some pictures from our trip. Probably. Sure. Does anybody have any questions? Yes, Steve.
You said earlier, I was shocked that one there, and they try to force Christianity on them.
No, I don't. I don't think we. What did you hear? That who went?
The rebel.
Oh, the Kampas. The Kham is a region of Tibet, as Amdo, Usong, and so people from Kham, or from any part, they put a little pa on the end of it to recognize. So like we would be Galvestonian, not instead of Galvestonian, we'd be Galveston Pop, is what we would be recognized in Galveston Pa. That's so, I'm a Galveston Pa. So the Kampas are people from Kham, and the Kham culture is a warrior culture, and so they fought the resistance to begin with, and then were recruited by the CIA to harass the Chinese. So, that's okay. Isn't this fabulous? This is Tenzin Namdok at 100. And he was in his room. I was talking to him. He came in the room, and he says, now, I can't hear anymore. My ear's gone. And my leg won't work anymore. My leg hurts. Of course, that's the one where he was shot. And so he said, my leg doesn't work anymore, but the rest of me is good. And I was so delighted because he said, oh, you all gave me my memories back. I couldn't remember how far it was from here to here, and you all looked it up. It was just such a heartwarming delight to not only know that he'd read it, but that it actually meant something to him personally. We were able to give him something in return for his generosity of sharing his stories with us and allowing us to tell his story. So there he is at 100. We have a couple of other pictures, some of when he was younger. This is Tenzin Namdok on the right, and on the left is Sanjay Tenzin in the book, who later became the head of the Bun religion, His Holiness Lungtak Timpa Nima. Let me tell you, it was really a hard choice to decide what we were going to do with all these strange names in this book, because the Tibetans changed their names throughout their life and for different occasions. And there's no family names. There's lineages, but there's no family names. So we had to pick and choose. And then one more, goes back even further. This is from the 60s when they were in London. So on the far right is Samten Karme, who didn't go back to India, he left the monkhood and stayed in academia, and he is a well-known Tibetologist, worldwide known. He studies Tibetan stuff. He's published probably 15 or 20 books and innumerable papers, and he's world renowned on Tibet and on the Bun religion in the Western culture. And then in the bottom right here on the right is Tenzin Namdak, and to the left is Sanjay Tenzin. See, I even stumble over it. And the far left is David Snellgrove, the British scholar who brought them all to London under a Rockefeller grant, a Rockefeller Foundation grant. So it's an amazing story, just an amazing story. Yes, ma'am. They all spoke English, except there's a chapter in here by Tempa Woser, who was one of the monks at the monastery that escaped from the monastery and was shot trying to get up to where Tenzin Namdak was. Anyway, we needed an interpreter for him. He didn't speak English, but everybody else that we talked to spoke English because they learned English when they went to London. And they teach in English, and Samten Karme actually was the most help for us in terms of the day-to-day little details that brings it to life. The monks didn't remember and didn't think it was important to tell us about their clothes or their shoes or how their families made a living and that kind of stuff. Whereas Samten Karme, being trained in the Western way of writing and thinking, understood that in order to bring the story to life, we needed all those little details. And he was very generous. He spent days, hours and days with us, answering all of our questions and filling in all the information about the background of the culture and all of that kind of stuff. Yes? Oh, sure. The Tibetan Buddhism, you probably have seen some about Tibetan Buddhism. And Bun was the religion in Tibet prior to Buddhism being introduced in the 7th century. So there's much like the amalgamation of, for example, the way Catholicism looks in Mexico, which was built around the indigenous culture there. Then the way Tibetan Buddhism looks is built around Bun and the traditions that were there prior to Buddhism coming in to Tibet. So all the things that you see that distinguishes it from, say, Zen in Japan, which is extremely sparse and simple, whereas the Tibetan is an explosion of color and ceremonies and stuff and all this stuff going on. That's an amalgamation of the Bun tradition and Buddhism coming in. There was not any written language from back before then, so it's hard to know who borrowed from whom. The Buddhists say that Bun has borrowed everything from the Buddhism. And the Bun said, oh, well, Sakyamuni, he was the original Buddha, the beginner of the founding, the discoverer, the person who taught Buddhism to everybody else was nothing but a reincarnation of Tompa Shinrab, our Buddha. So we're not really sure. The iconography, if you were to walk into a room full of thangkas and murals and paintings and everything, you probably wouldn't be able to see a whole lot of difference in the iconography between Buddhist and Bon. But if you're trained, you can see that there is a little bit of a difference. Most of the philosophy is exactly the same, and a lot of the practices will seem similar. I was attracted to Bon personally because it does not require or request any faith. They demand that you listen and experience, practice and experience, and then if it fits, it's yours. And the more you practice and the more it fits to you, then the more you begin to say, okay, well, they told me this, and I practiced this, and I realized this, and so therefore, if they're telling me this, then maybe that's true too. So that's where the faith comes in. It's not from a belief faith, but a experiential kind of, well, maybe I can expect this to happen if they tell me this. The other reason I was attracted to it is because it's very earth-based. They have a lot of practices, and it's coordinated with the elements. They explain everything that's going on in the world and in yourself using the elements. And this was, being a lifelong conservationist and tree hugger, that was certainly something that I was attracted to personally. And it came about, I had a dream, and it came to me in a dream. And from there, I started to explore what was out there. And then when I found Bon, I said, well, I'm going to test that one out. So that's why I'm here. 20 years later, I'm still here. So, any other questions? We have books if anybody's interested in a book. And you all should have bookmarks. And if you don't, they're in the back. If you're interested in the book, it's available anywhere you buy books, in both paperback, digital, and audio. So enjoy.